What's going on, world? Coming at you guys again. We got another quick video. Fighting. Let's talk about it. So, when you are as experienced as a fighter as I am, and you've trained and studied martial arts and fighting as a whole as much as I have, you start to really think clearly and see a clear picture about fighting as a whole. When we talk about fighting all around, right? And we look at culture that revolves around fighting, and then the actual people that make up that culture in correlation to how they fight, it gives you a better understanding and recognition of the unification within the culture based specifically on the context of their fighting. One of the biggest forms that I want to talk about today, when we talk about martial arts, we think about the Chinese, right? The Chinese have developed they're known for having developed so many different forms of martial arts, right? But the martial arts in which they have created and they practice, when they fight against each other, it is not with intent to harm or kill the other person. It's to triumph over the individual, right? And the very interesting perspective is when you do a correlation between, say, Chinese and Japanese. Well, the Chinese martial arts, so you talk about kung fu, wushu, you talk about jeet kune do is a more modern version, or the Chinese martial arts through Buddhism, right? Through the Shaolin Temple. These are all forms of fighting in which disable your opponent, but not necessarily inflict maximum damage or death. Now, we look at the Japanese. Well, the Japanese had a different perspective, right? And theirs was a little bit more extreme, right? And so that's why you have a direct correlation as to why specifically, when you look at the culture and the unification of the people, well, China's a lot more unified than Japan. But when you look at a strategic perspective for fighting in, say, Japanese to, say, another culture, to where fighting is a little bit more chaotic and extreme, we can look at, say, the English, right? The English have been known, or let's just say Caucasian people in general, English, Irish, Scottish, right? Scandinavian. When you look at all of those cultures combined, right, the Caucasian cultures combined, these individuals practiced martial arts and fighting in a way that was specifically designed to kill each other, right? To inflict maximum damage. And when you go look at the empires, the nations, the countries, the people who make up these cultures to really our present day, well, the Chinese are very unified. The Japanese are very unified. The Caucasian race, they're broken down into subsects, and they're very small and they're not very unified. They're coming around, right? Because of, mixed martial arts has become the norm, right? And so, they've transitioned out of that. And then when you look at, let's say, Africans fight, and, the Africans, they don't fight in a manner and way that, destroys or kills their opponent. They do a form of sambo, right, or sand wrestling. They're transitioning as well. Now, when you consider all of these factors, to where you see Africans, trying to come together and unify, just like the other cultures in which I mentioned, now you come to look at Black Americans. Well, Black Americans are one of the only cultures on the planet that present day, when they fight, They have no real regard for the individual in which they are fighting. You need to take this into consideration. This is a wake-up call to black people, right? Because the methodology in which you practice amongst yourselves and to other people is a direct reflection of how the world sees you. You know, in the black community, there are a few individuals and there are small subsects within that culture and community that when it comes to fighting or a confrontation or altercation, they say, go get the gloves, right? This is another reason why boxing is so popular amongst the older individuals within the black community, because it is a way to settle the score. But we also know that boxing can be very deadly, right? One of the ways that I think that black people really need to come to a new frontier when it comes to solving the problems in which they are coming into contact or confrontation with is the way they settle disputes as a child all the way through an adult. The idea that you have to lose a sense of morality when engaging another individual who may be a threat to you, utilizing lethal force, unfortunately, it puts you back into what the stereotype is, which is crabs in a bucket. It's time to change that perspective. It's time that we stop looking at each other as a threat so significantly that you have to lose the empathy of taking another individual's life. There's a reason why Jesus said, turn the other cheek. You don't have to go full on out. You can defend yourself, but you don't have to cause maximum damage. And, in the Bible, it says that you should leave vengeance to God. Vengeance will be mine. It says that in the Bible. This is a consideration. So, as we continue to move forward, maybe it's time to start practicing applications of self-defense, which can turn deadly, but 90% of it is practiced utilizing neutralizing and disabling techniques. Because then the world may look at black people in a more civilized manner and fashion. And, the saying goes, if you treat someone like an animal, you should expect them to act like an animal. Well, if you stop acting in a manner in which it shows that you have no regard to life or other people's lives, maybe people will start looking at you like an individual whose life actually has value.